Hey everyone! So there was some really encouraging news last week when the pharmaceutical company Moderna announced that the phase 3 clinical trial for their mRNA COVID-19 vaccine is showing 95% efficacy. And just a couple days after that, the company Pfizer, in partnership with BioNTech, says that their study is also showing similar results. Now, if you want to learn more about mRNA and mRNA vaccines, I have another video that talks about both of those things that you can check out. In a world where we all just want to get back to normal as soon as possible, honestly, a vaccine is probably the safest way that that's going to happen. And because of that, it's really important to understand how scientists go about making these vaccines and making sure that they're safe. And one of my friends, Gwen, was actually a participant in the Pfizer clinical trial. So I interviewed her about her experience as well as to learn a little bit more about the trial itself. Now, this was a pretty in-depth conversation, so this video is quite a bit longer than most of my other ones. So I've included timestamps in the description with different topics we discussed, so you can go there and kind of skip around to the different topics that interest you most. Now, without further ado, here's Gwen Coder.
Hi, Gwen. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Nicole, you too. It's been so long, and yeah, all now in Zoom land.
I know. I think the last time I saw you in person was like in April. No, it wouldn't have been April. It would have been like the end of February or like first week of March.
Yeah, we left our Professors for the Future meeting and have just, everyone just here.
I know. Oh, well, it's so good to see you even like virtually. And thank you so much for like agreeing to kind of like do this interview and kind of help like kind of explain it more to like both myself and anyone who will like kind of watch this. So if like real quick before we kind of get into everything, if you just kind of want to introduce yourself and like kind of what you do and all of that.
Sure. So my name is Gwen Coder. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the graduate group of nutritional biology at UC Davis. So immediately after dietary intake, there are all sorts of metabolic changes that are taking place, and I'm looking at one of the regulators of different metabolic gene expression within different metabolic pathways.
Awesome. Oh, that sounds so cool.
Thanks.
So you were involved with the clinical trial with Pfizer for one of the mRNA vaccine candidates for COVID-19. So I guess just kind of hopping right into that. So I guess like firstly, like, how did you even find out about it? Like, did someone like email you and like reach out to you asking you to do it? And like, how did they get your information? And like, why did you end up deciding to participate?
Yeah, so I saw it. Someone had posted about it on Facebook. I'm not even sure who it was, but saying that one of the study sites was in Sacramento and it would be nearby. And so, yeah, there was an online form and I submitted my name and my age and like a few, little pieces of information. And about a month later, they called me and asked if I was still interested and went through a list of, inclusion criteria, like took a really brief medical history to see if I fit. So the reason why I wanted to do it, for a couple of things. Number one, I mean, I think we're all struggling in lockdown and, everybody talks about getting back to normal, but that's not going to happen until we have a vaccine, and we can't have a vaccine until it's tested. So, doing my part to make life a little bit better, I guess. I'm also, from experience, I do human clinical trials as well. I know that human subjects are kind of difficult. They don't always do what you ask them to. And so there was also a little bit of sympathy on my part for the team who's putting it together that, they're going to ask all of these people to do these things, and hopefully most of them do it, but it's kind of hard to tell. People do what people do. So I knew that I would, actually like follow directions and do what they asked me to do. And just, so before doing my PhD, I have a master's in public health, and I I appreciate and understand the science behind vaccination. I'm not going to say I believe, because it's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of fact. I have an understanding of the science, that I know how important they are. And so when a vaccine becomes available, I'm going to be one of the people screaming loudly at everybody I know to please get it and get vaccinated. And so this was also sort of an opportunity to lead by example, and to, show that, hey, I'm willing to do it. I'm not just telling you to go and do it. I'm doing it. So,
Right.
So there was that.
No, and I think that's huge too, because it's like, and I know like everyone's like a little like has concerns with the vaccine, even if they're not like typically people who would question vaccines, but just because it got developed like so quickly and stuff. And like, and I can understand that to a point too. That's just like, it is like, it's like a new thing, but I think that's so awesome that you're like wanting to, or you want to lead by example and be like, no, like I trust the science and know, and especially since, you have a degree in public health, like, how rigorous clinical trials are, and have a really good inside look at like, no, like if it gets through clinical trials, like you can actually trust it because you know how those work. And that's really awesome information to have.
Mhm.
Yeah. So then like, so you were saying before, and I think this kind of gets into my next question, that's like, you've worked with people doing clinical trials, and people don't always do what they're supposed to, and that can make things difficult. So I guess one, like, what were things that you needed to do to be part of this clinical trial, like throughout its duration? And like, do you think those are things that the researchers can pick up on, like, okay, this person wasn't quite following what we needed them to do? And then how do they kind of go about dealing with the data when that happens?
Yeah. So for this clinical trial, it was actually pretty straightforward. I went in and did, like, again, a medical history, to make sure that, first of all, I wasn't allergic to any of the components of the vaccine, that I didn't, have any kind of underlying issues that would leave me immunocompromised, or anything like that. So I, went in and answered about a bunch of questions. They went through the study team went through the informed consent process with me to make sure that, as a participant, I understood what I was agreeing to, what I was getting myself into. And then they did a nasal swab to test to see if I had an active COVID infection, which I didn't. And so after the nasal swab was completed, I was able to get a shot. And so I got the first shot. I needed to sit and wait to make sure that there wasn't any kind of vaccine reaction or anything like that. And then I was done. There was also a blood draw in there before I got the shot. So I had the nasal swab and a blood draw, and then I got the shot. 3 weeks later, I went back and pretty much did all that a second time: the blood draw, the nasal swab, and the shot, which was either the vaccine or the placebo.
Okay.
And then I'm going to go back a few more times over the next about a year and a half to just have blood drawn. I have a weekly symptom survey that I fill out. It's actually really neat. It's from an app on my phone.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's really convenient. But just once a week, they ask me to fill in if I've had any symptoms that might be COVID, if I've been in close contact with anybody who's been diagnosed positive. And then if any of that happens, if there's anything that's potentially suspicious, they had sent me home with a kit so that I could do a nasal swab on myself, and then could send it to them. Right. So they would, so that they, make absolutely certain that they're catching all of the cases in both groups.
That's awesome. So they're being really thorough. That's really awesome to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And then for your second question, dealing with people who aren't following what they're supposed to follow. So in general, I think this is pretty straightforward. It's not quite some of the other, I do trials that are food related or looking at cholesterol. So people like need to come in fasted, and we can sort of tell when we draw somebody's blood if they haven't fasted. But for this, so in general, when you have a clinical trial, you analyze all of the data. And so even if you know that somebody, dropped out and didn't complete, or that they didn't quite follow the instructions that they were supposed to, you still include their data. And this is how you're able to extrapolate to a larger population. You're not just looking at the highly, highly motivated people who did everything that they were supposed to do. You're looking at the broad range of what people do when they're in the trial. And so that's, it's called, in statistics, it's called intention to treat analysis. And so you're looking at everybody in their group assignment, regardless of what they did. And so, there's a couple of different ways to handle it. I think in this trial, it's pretty straightforward. You really just need to show up and get your shots when you need to, and give blood at the follow-up visits afterwards. For some others, so for me, if I know that somebody has come in on a day when, for example, they're supposed to be fasted, I could either ask them to come back, or I generally will ask them to come back, so that we still have the data. It is challenging because you think that people who are, following instructions or doing things are more highly motivated probably than the general population. So you just really want to see, this question of efficacy. So does something biologically work, or is something effective? Is something, going to work in the larger population where people don't always follow directions, where people, don't always, do the things that you want them to do. And so that's more of an effectiveness question. And a broader clinical trial like this, the efficacy has already been shown, hopping back to the vaccine trial. So the efficacy would have been shown in some of the earlier phases of the clinical trial. And now we're looking at effectiveness. We're looking at the broad range of the population and what kind of response they're having.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense, because like speaking to people following directions, and like you said, this one does seem like it's pretty straightforward, but if it's this vaccine or some other company or research labs vaccine that ends up being approved and what we all hopefully end up getting very soon, it's sounding like a lot of companies are kind of playing with like the 2-dose approach. And I remember with like the Gardasil vaccine, it was like a 3-dose thing. And I remember I got like the first 2, and you have to wait, like, I think it was some like decent amount of months in between shot 1 and shot 2. And then or maybe it was that between shot 2 and shot 3, it was a long amount of time, but like, I like didn't get the third one for like years, because I also thought there was only like 2 steps. So it even goes to show, even people who like want to have everything covered, that's like, when you have things that are broken up into multiple doses, and if you have to wait any amount of time, people could forget, or like they have to wait longer because like maybe they're not feeling well or something comes up. So like that makes sense that even like here, this controlled setting, in order to kind of apply it to those situations, you got to keep everyone in, even if you can kind of tell they're not quite doing what they should. Yeah, I guess that's also like really nice then to know that it's like, okay, so even in this like potentially more controlled setting, because you're including everything, you can hopefully start to account for some of the more variability in like the general population.
Yeah. And I think the Gardasil is a great example. I was the same. I got the first 2 and then moved and just completely like spaced that I needed to get the third one, and also got it years and years later. Which I don't think is ideal. I can't exactly remember the series, but and those things happen, and they happen despite the best of intentions. But what you hope to see is that, okay, there is still some protection, even in the event that something like this happens. So yeah, I think that's, it's the like textbook correct way to go about a clinical trial at this phase, but it's also really useful for the people who are going to be, hopefully, knock on wood, getting one of the effective vaccines afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that kind of leads into the next one, because you mentioned there's a placebo group, which for people listening, like a placebo group is like someone who is still getting they're still receiving the same treatment as those actually getting the vaccine, but they're given something else. So like a lot of times, it's a lot of times referred to as like a sugar pill. So like you could test someone taking ibuprofen and someone just taking some sugar and seeing how that affects things. So I guess one, do you know if you were in the vaccine or the placebo group? And do you know what the placebo was? Like, was it just water? Like, what were they kind of like, I guess, injecting you with the placebo?
Yeah. So I don't know what group I was in. I have a suspicion that I might have been in the vaccine group because I had a minor immune response afterwards. So I had, especially after my second shot, I had a slight fever for 2 days,
Okay.
like 99, not a high fever, but just enough that like I felt like, oh, I might be getting sick.
Right.
And that's showing that your body is mounting an immune response. It's not. Yeah, I think my mom always says that, oh, I get the flu vaccine and then I get the flu. And it's like, well, no,
Quite.
yeah, your body is preparing itself like you might have the flu. And yeah, so I had that experience. So maybe I am in the vaccine group, but it's also possible that, that was just, my brain telling me like, oh no, you got shot a second time. You should definitely be feeling this.
Right. And then that's like the whole point of like having the placebo. It's like seeing how much like, yeah. So I guess like a better explanation, like the placebo is kind of a way to see like how much like mind over matter kind of can play into an extent for
Right.
some things.
Yeah. And so, yeah, everybody got a shot of some kind. The label was over it, so you couldn't see quite what it looked like inside.
Mhm.
I would suspect it would probably have been something harmless, like saline, so like a mild salt water.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Well, that makes sense. So then I guess and I guess this wasn't something that I had in my questions originally, but I was just kind of thinking about that because you said, they'll monitor people for about 2 years, and that's, to kind of, start to look at long-ish term effects. Obviously, like major longitudinal studies, like that's just going to take time, and we all need to be patient with that. But so for about 2 years, so then for anyone who got the placebo, like, will they be notified that they were in the placebo group? So that way, then when the vaccine is publicly available, they can still go get vaccinated? Or how does that kind of get handled in something like this when they are trying to look for longitudinal effects or long-term effects?
One of the things that was, very clear when we were doing the informed consent process was that at any point, if a vaccine does become available, if there is something that's approved and on the market, it is completely, if you want to take it, go ahead and take it.
Okay.
But just notify them and let them know so that they can sort of see what happens. And so I think that's one of the questions for me is also, following the news, like, okay, I think I've had the Pfizer vaccine, but I don't know if the Moderna vaccine is approved first and available and on the market, and I'm eligible for it, because it sounds like most of the vaccines will go first to higher risk populations. Would I take it? And I think that is also a good question. I think that my understanding, again, just ethically, is that if there were major issues, or a major success, it's generally good practice to tell people which group they were in.
Okay.
So if somebody, if there was, if there was just clear and convincing evidence of success, it's really not ethical to deny people that right and like keep them in the placebo group and follow them.
Right.
When you know that there's an effective treatment. So I would imagine if that happens, we will be told,
Okay.
if it gets to the point that the trial stops. So there are, and that's another thing that I think, like, the general population outside of science maybe isn't as aware of, or wasn't aware of until, seeing all of this in the news. There's fairly consistent and like identified ahead of time points where whoever is running the study is going to look at the data, and they're going to look at the number of cases in the control group versus the vaccine group. They're going to look at things like adverse reactions. They're going to look for, deaths or infections, or, whatever those outcomes are. And
Right.
they'll look at those and they'll follow those throughout. It's not like they will just sit there and wait and not look at anything, until the 2 years are up. They are analyzing that data throughout, which is why, they can make some of these decisions or these news releases earlier that, the vaccine is looking really promising.
Right. So they're just kind of like, they're very actively monitoring everything and like really being very consistent with tallying up everything and figuring out to the best that they can with what information they have, what's going on, and not just sitting there. It's like, well, we got to wait for like X and Y time points. It's like, no, it's like continuous data analysis, continuous like attempts to understand what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's awesome. So then, yeah, I guess in that 2-year monitoring, I think you had mentioned before that like you would get blood work. Is there anything else that will go into that monitoring phase, or is it really just kind of like blood work and kind of seeing how long your immunity would last?
I think that's all it is. Yeah, I think it's just looking to see how long you're actively maintaining antibodies. If you're in the, if you're in the control, or if you're in the vaccine group, and then I guess if you're in the control group, also if you had, if you displayed an asymptomatic infection that was missed throughout the monitoring, you could also see that. Because and even in the vaccine group, that might be something else. Maybe you do contract COVID, maybe it doesn't completely prevent you from getting it, but it's a less severe reaction.
Right.
Which would, I think
For like the placebo group, it also still just gives us more information for people who are either asymptomatic carriers or have like very mild symptoms to where like they like very innocently think they just have a cold or something. So it gives us even more data and understanding for those people, which is a good chunk of the population.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really awesome. It's like not just information about the vaccine, but it's also just like how the disease works in people. Like it's helping with a lot of different areas.
Right.
Awesome. And then, yeah, so I guess just kind of like coming up on the last few questions. So, I think I probably know your answer to this, especially given that you're like have a degree in public health. It's like, if you were ever given an opportunity to participate in the clinical trial again, like would you do so?
Yeah, of course. It's, it's advancing science, and, as a scientist and as, you being one as well, like we're asking these questions and, we're working on our own research, but this is an opportunity for us to help someone else answer their questions and answer their research and ultimately improve human health. So yeah, absolutely. I would.
Yeah. And I think that's something that like, even for me, like, because I'm kind of doing more like kind of like basic research. I'm not quite that clinical, like, working on like with cancer cells, and like it could lead down the line to helping develop treatments, but like I'm several steps back from that. Like I'm not in drug development or anything. So it's like, I think a lot of times, especially in basic science, it can be hard to remember or to like feel like the public health effects of your work. So yeah, it's like participating in clinical trials, whether it's like helping with data collection, running them yourself, or being a participant. It is like you were saying, like such a like active way to really like be at the forefront and helping that with that. And I guess like something to note, it's also like, this is like a phase 3 clinical trial. So like they've done smaller scale tests of this. Like they're already seeing a lot of positive reassurance that this is like safe and could work. And so I think that's something else important for people to remember. Like when they hear phase 3, it's like, I think I was looking into the other day, like you need at least 100 people. And like this study has like, gosh, like just short of 50,000 people. So it's like, there's a lot, like they really went above and beyond the number of people you even need in this kind of study to really show that it's effective, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
And so then, so I guess, so following up, it's like, what's something that you learned from this experience? I don't know if this is the first clinical trial you've actually been a participant in. And, like you said, like you're in public health, so maybe you already knew a lot about it, but how was this different from, I guess, being on the administrative end versus being a participant?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think one of the things that this has really shown me, I feel like the study team is very accessible. And so anytime there's questions, I've sent an email to the study coordinator, asking to reschedule a visit, and I got an email very quickly. So just how communicative they've been, if there were any questions, if, anything was going on. So I think that it has just really, shown me a lot of times, and again, like my clinical trials are around eating food and drawing blood. So it's definitely not on the same level. But they've been so approachable and so available. And I think that is really important in making, me feel, first of all, like, safe and wanted and all of those things. And, like, this truly matters. Like, we aren't just, humanized lab rats that they're sticking people in, like they are treating us as people. And so I think, I think that's something that will influence how I do my own clinical trials going forward, and my role as, and my role as the point of contact for people who are doing these. There is that awkward balance in academia, as we've talked about before, like the work-life balance of like, do I really want to set a precedent of be answering emails at 11? But maybe, at 11 o'clock at night, but maybe it's one of those things where like, there might be some cases where it's probably, it wouldn't hurt to make an exception if it was somebody who was like very, very truly concerned about something and my answer could help them sleep a little easier. So I think, it's it definitely on, like, not quite like the customer service, but like the patient interaction side of it.
Yeah, kind of like bedside manner almost.
Right. Like how to make sure that people who are going through this feel, first of all, feel like they're important, because they absolutely are. Even with 50,000 people, it's still, those are still 50,000 individuals who made that decision to like, yes, I'm going to let somebody stick a needle in my arm. Like, those, so there is the human aspect of it. And I think just making sure that, they feel that they, feel like safe and like their concerns are heard, and all of those things. I think looking at some of the informed consent documents that we give to people, and that, you see in clinical trials, like they are supposed to be written at a fairly easy level so that people understand the level of science, that people are able to understand and comprehend. So we're not throwing jargon in there. One of the things that like they always make us do is, instead of saying, oh, we're going to take just 30 milliliters of blood, like how much is that actually in terms that somebody can understand?
Right.
But even then, like there is still is kind of a barrier for people about why, what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so I think it is really important for people to truly be able to give informed consent, for you to be there to answer questions or allay any fears or concerns that they might have. So yeah, I'd say that's something that I've learned.
That's awesome. And and I think for me, like having not really done anything like this before, like, I didn't do public health work. I know a little bit about clinical trials and like clinical work, but definitely not a very extensive knowledge. Like this is like, for me, really reassuring to hear that, you have people kind of like following up and really being thorough with questions and like making the informed consent, like at a level that like pretty much anyone could understand. Cause it's like, that is really important. And I think that really goes to show that it's like these people doing this, it's like, they are pouring so much work and so much of themselves into it. Cause it's like, they want to succeed. Like they want to better the human health, human experience, like whatever word you want to use to describe it. Like, so it's like, it's really important to them that they do make this as accessible as possible and as safe of an environment as they can for everyone. So that's just really awesome and like really reassuring for me that it's like people are doing their due diligence and really wanting to make sure that the people who are trusting them can trust them. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and it's really appreciated. I mean, I don't want to say I would have done it no matter what, but this is really reaffirming to me that this was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I for sure, I bet. So then, yeah, and I guess, kind of like last question, kind of, I guess, building off of what we were already talking about, but like, what's like one thing, or like if you had to pick one thing or like a couple of things, because I'm sure there's a lot, that you would like the general public to just know about this whole process, whether it's from your own being a public health degree holder or like a participant, just like what are some things you like would like people to know and kind of like take away from this and like have like greater confidence and like reassurance in all of the hard work that's being put into the various vaccines that are getting developed.
Yeah. Oh, that's really giving me a soapbox to stand on, Nicole. I, I think one of the one of the big things is that, yes, these are done by big companies. Vaccine trials or clinical trials are often done by large pharmaceutical companies. But part of the reason is that, it takes a lot to do when you think about 50,000 people. That's 50,000 people who, need staff members, need people there to draw blood, need somebody there to give informed consent, need somebody to run the lab data, need somebody to run the statistical analysis, need somebody to, be monitoring all of this constantly. Like, there is a lot of work to go into this, and the reason why it's, big pharma and not like two grad students in a basement is that it takes a lot of resources to do this, and so that's why it comes from these companies. So that's one thing I would like people to know. I would also just want to reassure that, for something to get to this point, like there have been tests, you will never go into a clinical trial where somebody just sat down one day and said, I wonder what happens if we inject XYZ into people, like what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That is not going to happen ever in the United States at this point in history. There needs to be some kind of justification. If it's something that might potentially have ill effects, this will have been carried out in cell lines or lab animals before going to humans. So it is, I'm not going to say that there never are adverse effects. There can be, it happens, but there really has been a lot of work done in the background to make sure that these are safe at a minimum before anything else is done or happens.
Right.
And just, that, if we want to receive the benefit of drug development and vaccine development, someone needs to participate in it, and why shouldn't it be you?
No, yeah, and like you were saying too, that it's like there's so many steps before you even get to like a phase 1 clinical trial, let alone phase 3. That it's like, yes, adverse things can happen. Like, it's why you still see like these commercials with like the lawyers and like, were you exposed to asbestos like 30 years ago or whatever? Like these things can happen, but it's like it's not due to negligence. It's like there's so much that goes into it, and I remember the US FDA, like our FDA compared like is so thorough and everything. So like to get FDA approval is difficult. It's not like this very easy thing that they just like hand out to anything. So that's
Right.
another thing to help reassure people. It's like we do have like at the federal level like really strict regulations and people like being very thorough and very careful at the data that they are receiving from these companies to make sure that it is true or that like it is like as good as they are trying to say that it is.
Right. And, in thinking about some of the other things that have been going on with the federal government recently, like this is something like the FDA has a very strong history of regulation. One of the things, thalidomide as a medication in like the 60s or 70s, there are not very many children of thalidomide in the United States because our FDA never approved the use of this anti-nausea drug in pregnant women that, we ended up finding out after the fact in countries in Europe that it led to all sorts of birth defects in the fetus of the woman who took it. And so and this is something that is 60 or 70 years old at this point that, we have as an FDA a very strong history. I'm not saying that, everything that they do is perfect and that they're spot on with all of the decisions that they make, but there is a process and it's a very entrenched process that, we've established over decades.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up. Like, it's not just, we're not just reliant on the goodwill and the beneficence of whoever is running the trial, that there is also this external oversight.
Right. Exactly. So it's like Yeah, I think that's like such a good point to make, that it's like there's lots of people looking at this and like really making sure that like this is safe, because like no one wants to see harm done to people. Like you just don't want that, especially as scientists. Like that is not our goal. Our goal, especially like you mean like being like on like more the life sciences side, like our goal is to better understand like human life and like how it works and like how to improve things that kind of break sometimes. And it's like, what are the best ways to do that? Not to break it more.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a nightmare scenario, is, waking up, and there have been clinical trials that, the treatment has hurt people or killed people. And I just thinking about trying to live with yourself about what that would be like, I can't see people just rushing into things. I mean, I know clearly it happened and we saw it with CRISPR, but for the most part, I think the scientific community is very cautious about, making sure that we do no harm, even though we don't take a Hippocratic oath for the most part, unless we're practicing physicians. It's still like that idea of do no harm is still so central to what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was awesome. I think that's pretty much all the questions I have, unless you can like think of something that, that we didn't touch on that you think we should. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. I'm really glad. I'm really glad we did this. That was fun.
Yeah, no, this was so awesome. And like, I learned so much, everything. So yeah, I guess like real quick, if you just want to plug like any social media or what, like different ways that people can like keep up with you if you want, or whatever, like go ahead and just kind of plug whatever you want here.
Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter is public, at GwenCoder, GwenChodur. I tweet a little bit about science, but also a lot about grad student advocacy.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll drop like a link to your Twitter page like in the description, so that way then people can look at that there. All right. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Gwen.
Of course. My pleasure. It was good to see you.
It was so good to see you too. Hopefully we'll get to hang out in person when this is all over.
I hope so.
Yes.